the Medical AI Podcast.
Hello, I'm Dr. Felix Beacher, and this is the Medical AI Podcast, a 30-minute thrill ride of big ideas. We talk to a range of top guests, from industry innovators to scientists to philosophers. This is brought to you by Omdia and Informatech, where I'm the head of healthcare technology. Diagnostics is a new company based in the UK. It provides services in pathology and diagnostics for cancer and has an emphasis on AI-based techniques. Professor Runjan Chetty is the Chief Medical Officer. He is a pathologist by training and has special expertise in gut pathology. Runjan has held chairs in pathology in South Africa and Glasgow. Runjan, it is an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Felix. Delighted to speak to you as well.
So, Runjan, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your career journey up to the present?
Sure. So I graduated as a medical doctor from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and then embarked on a training program in histopathology or anatomical pathology, as it's known in other parts of the world. And I did that in South Africa. And then took my first consultant job at the University of Cape Town, emigrated to Australia, worked there, and then went to the University of Oxford, St. John's College, to do a PhD. And having done that, was then enticed back to South Africa to head the pathology department at the University of Natal in Durban, South Africa. And then, having spent about 7 years there, I then went to Canada, where I am currently, and was part of the University Health Network, where I subsequently became the medical director and pathologist in chief for several years. And then I've always been an academic and very interested in innovations in our field, and I've been very fortunate to live through several of the very important changes that have impacted on the way we practice pathology, from immunohistochemistry through to molecular diagnostics, and now what I dub the new kid on the block, and that is digital pathology enhanced by artificial intelligence. And I was fortunate enough to meet Deciphex, and Diagnostics was created as a clinical accompaniment to their preclinical platform. So that in a nutshell is my background, and I've always been very interested in AI and diagnostic algorithms, and also the delivery of pathology services to remote areas using digital means.
Okay, so could you tell us about Diagnostics? What does it do?
So Diagnostics was formed in about November 2020, where the company decided, having had a really very good base in preclinical pathology and pharmaceutical trials and clinical trials, to utilize their unique platform for the clinical area. And so Diagnostics was formed and then realized that there is a niche market in pathology. There are several challenges that pathology is facing globally. And one of the most important imperatives that's driving issues in pathology is a shortage of pathologists globally. And it's only going to get exacerbated as people take earlier retirement and fewer people are coming into the specialty. And added to that is also diminishing expertise. So generally, the way medicine is going, it's going towards precision medicine, and precision medicine requires precision pathology. And so therefore, subspecialization within pathology has become very important. And so for a lung lesion or lung cancer, you need a lung pathologist. For a stomach cancer, you need a GI pathologist, and so on and so forth. And that's what's happened. It's become very organ-based, very detailed. And so the days of the generalist, who do an excellent job, are somewhat numbered as the demands for expertise grows. So Diagnostics is really going to play a role in fulfilling those two remits, and that is the global shortage of pathologists and the delivery of expertise. So to address that, we have recruited an international network of pathologists who are renowned and experts and the opinion makers and shapers in their respective fields, ostensibly in the UK, Canada, and the US. But we're also going to move globally in terms of getting pathologists on board. And we then want to fulfill those two needs. One is to provide primary diagnostics where there is a shortage of pathologists, and we've already made inroads in that area, and also to provide second opinions based on the expertise of the pathologists we have within the network.
Okay, and what kind of disease areas do you cover?
So we cover the full spectrum, actually. So from neuropathology to skin pathology to gynaecological pathology to genitourinary pathology, gastrointestinal pathology. So we cover the entire spectrum of subspecialties that are offered within anatomic pathology.
Okay, and could you describe the AI component to the business?
Right, absolutely. So the actual basis, the mode in which we will operate is using digitized or digitalized slides, and this is also known as whole slide imaging, and that is a means to an end. It is a convenient way of transferring images to pathologists remotely, very seamlessly, and they can be viewed in any secure venue. And this obviates the issue of having to package and post slides, which are very fragile and can be broken, take forever to get to their point of delivery, and then unpackaging, etc. So it obviates this rather tedious, unwieldy process. And bolted onto that is artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence means lots of things to lots of people. And in the context of pathology, I like to think of it as augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. It is a form of artificial intelligence. Clearly, we want to have diagnostic algorithms that assist pathologists, especially in the difficult areas. So it's not intended to replace pathologists. At the end of the day, I think the role of the pathologist will be redefined. Instead of generating a mere morphological diagnosis, they will lend more information using artificial intelligence to augment things and supplement areas that aren't readily apparent under the light microscope. So there are various forms of diagnostic algorithms and artificial intelligence that are being deployed currently.
Okay, so could you give us an example of the kind of artificial AI-based systems that you're developing?
So subjectivity is obviously a very important area in pathology. Opinions vary, interpretation varies, and that's what pathology is, really. It's not an absolute clear-cut black and white subspecialty within the greater remit of medicine. And subjectivity is dependent on the expertise of the pathologist and their experience. And there are several what I would call gray areas. And one of them is in prostate pathology, where distinction between a grade 3 and a grade 4 prostate cancer has very important therapeutic consequences on the patient. One is, if it's a 3, then you just watch the patient. Where it's a 4, there's active intervention in the form of surgery. So it is a big deal to the patient that we get it absolutely right, because obviously with any major surgery, there is associated morbidity and complications. So this is an area that has been widely investigated by several people involved in artificial intelligence to develop an algorithm that will distinguish between these two grades, which are, of course, of clinical importance. And companies have got them FDA approved, and they are almost ready for prime time usage. And what will happen is that the pathologist will have a look at the slide, reach their own conclusion, and then if there's doubt or they're unsure, then apply the algorithm, and this would help them make a more definitive diagnosis. So it's an adjunct to the pathologist's skills and clearly plays an important role.
So is that how it's being currently used? The pathologist is a bit ambivalent, and then he'll run the algorithm, and that will
Correct.
help sway his decision?
Exactly. They can do it before the pathologist sees it. So the slides are triaged by the algorithm, if you want, and then the pathologist sees it. But ideally, it would be better to have the pathologist look at it, then they make the decision, and then if they're unsure, yes, then go to the algorithm. Because obviously, if the algorithm pre-screens the slides and says this is a 4, it kind of prejudices the pathologist before they look at it. Mm-hmm. So you want to take that bias out.
So the responsibility upon the developers of these systems is pretty huge, right? And of course, that is always the case with the medical AI. But I mean, does that sense of responsibility weigh on you
No,
at all?
absolutely. I mean, we have to get it right. Ultimately, the final decision will rest with the pathologist. I don't foresee a scenario, certainly in the next 10, 15 years, where reliance will be exclusively on the AI, and the AI makes a profound decision, such as the one that I've just highlighted, where the patient has an operation, because ultimately it's a clinical decision with the surgeon, with the oncologist, with the pathologist. So it's a multidisciplinary decision whenever there is a therapeutic impact on a patient. So it will certainly aid the pathologist, and it's up to the developers to make it as reproducible, reliable, and robust as possible so that we obviate error. And that's really what we want to do.
Right. Now, developers in this field are, in general, I think, always trying to develop systems which will beat the human experts, right? It's a little bit like Gary Kasparov in 1997, where he was facing off against Deep Blue. That's what they're all trying to do. Otherwise, really, what's the point of them? Now, if you actually got into a situation where a developer had claimed to prove that his system was more accurate and maybe much more accurate than that of a pathologist, then why would you not trust the AI system?
And there are scenarios where they have shown the diagnostic algorithms and AI to be more accurate than the human eye. However, we're not at the point where the responsibility of making, as I've tried to elaborate previously, a clinical decision is based purely on a machine. I think we're not there yet, and I personally don't think we should ever get to that point, because the human factor, the fullness of the clinical scenario, and the entirety of the clinical problem needs to be assessed. So you can't take one facet of a diagnosis and slot that in without taking the full picture into account. So I think that is the very important area that we have to be mindful of. In areas where you need artificial intelligence for a very manual sort of task, absolutely, driving a car artificially, that sort of thing, where there aren't any sort of life-changing decisions that are made, is a different scenario. So I think we have to, be flexible in the way we interpret it. Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the most fascinating and central issues in the whole of medical AI. I think that, like in this situation that we've just discussed, if you have a human pathologist and he's ambivalent and he thinks, okay, well, maybe the AI will give me some additional information here. Now, if in general he thought that the AI system had worse judgment than he did, or she did, of course, then why would he listen to the AI system? He would only do that if he thought that somehow the algorithm had superior ability to make a judgment. No, is that not true?
No, absolutely. I think before algorithms come into clinical use, they have to be proved. And the utility, the reproducibility, and the long-term impact of that algorithm is clearly investigated. So the due diligence is done in the build-up to releasing it. Then the regulatory organizations like the FDA in the United States have to approve it for release as a clinical tool. So once it goes through those checks and balances, anyone who's using it will be pretty sure that it is reliable and not subject to any wild fluctuations. But at the end of the day, Felix, as I said, the pathologist retains the ultimate control and will take responsibility for the final diagnosis, be it AI generated or be it generated by themselves, ignoring the AI.
Now, we'll come on to the regulatory side of this, because that's very important and interesting too. But let's just explore the AI part a little bit more first. Now, what kind of challenges have you faced, or are you facing, in the development of these AI systems?
Sure. And so as I intimated earlier, before you have a robust, reliable, reproducible diagnostic algorithm, there's several steps that have to go through it. And, you have to have thousands of examples of a case to validate what you're doing. You have to have different color images. You have to have different thicknesses. So there are several technical considerations that have to be taken into account, because Obviously, there are geographic variations in the way slides are produced, and then the way the algorithm would interpret these subtle differences. So it's a long, drawn-out process that is somewhat painstaking, but obviously is iterative. And once that is done, then follow-up is performed, validation is performed, and the ability of the algorithm to be accurate is assessed. And then it goes into, as I said, the other regulatory balances. So at the moment, it is a slow process because you need thousands and thousands of examples of cases. So therefore, AI at the moment is geared towards pressing clinical issues, subjective areas, as I said, with prostate cancer, and then what is deemed to be low-hanging fruit. That is where there are large volumes of examples of cases. So an example would be gastritis, which is a very common ailment in the world, and it's driven by an organism called Helicobacter pylori. And as a gastrointestinal pathologist, we get tons and tons of gastric biopsies or stomach biopsies where we hunt for these H. pylori. In some cases, they're readily apparent and it's easy. But in the majority of cases, the organisms are scanty and it takes us a long time to hunt for them. So developing an algorithm that detects the H. pylori organism will certainly facilitate my efficiency. So if I get a slide that's pre-screened and the algorithm highlights an area and says, look over here for the H. pylori, I confirm it, and then I look for any other pathology, and then I can authorize the case or cite it out. So it is important to understand that algorithms play a role in different segments of the way we work. So in screening, and then in terms of helping us make a diagnosis, and then ultimately, if we want to address that later, I can talk about what I dub the holy grail of AI in pathology.
Yeah, no, please do. But before we come on to the holy grail, let me ask one other question. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're looking at a slide yourself and you're thinking, yes, that is cancerous, or maybe it's not cancerous, and there has been a disagreement between you and your AI system, and has that taught you anything? Do you ever get those kind of
in the development stage? Yes, we've had variation between what we would call cancer or early cancer, and the algorithm doesn't pick it up. But this goes into the learning for the algorithm. So the more you feed into the algorithm of these somewhat difficult subjective cases, the gray areas, the more it learns, the better it becomes. And that's why I say it's a long, drawn-out, iterative process where multiple images have to be assessed by the algorithm, and then that enriches the algorithm. And they're only released when everyone is satisfied that it has a high fidelity.
Okay. So I guess if you're, let's take the example of prostate cancer again, which I've had a bit of experience in myself. If you're looking at cells that have been taken from a biopsy from a prostate, you might be looking at a few different changes. Maybe the shape of the cells is asymmetric and looks a bit weird. Maybe the size of the cell is too big. So stuff like those kind of changes can indicate cancer, right?
Correct. Yes, in the architecture, there are several parameters which are fed into training the algorithm, and some of them you've just highlighted, yes.
And have you ever been in the situation where you've thought, that slide looks fine, and the algorithm says, no, that slide is cancerous, and then guess what? The algorithm turned out to be correct, and you've kind of thought, oh, that's quite surprising. Has that ever happened?
It has, absolutely. And then as the algorithm matures and gets better, you tend to see that where pathologists perhaps have missed a tiny focus, and the algorithm picks it up. Absolutely, I have seen that, yeah.
And I mean, obviously you'd want to see that, right? Otherwise the AI system is much less useful.
and I guess that's where the confidence in AI coming into play really stems from. Because I've seen that scenario firsthand myself, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so talk about the Holy Grail. That'd be
So as I said, you can put AI into different buckets, and as I mentioned earlier on, we've got a sort of screening bucket where slides can be pre-screened before they get to the pathologist, looking for things like Helicobacter pylori, tubular adenomas, early cancer. So these cases are flagged and can be marked as urgent because the algorithm has detected cancer in this slide. The pathologist's attention is drawn immediately to those slides. So it helps to triage cases in a backlog situation where tons of cases are accumulating, as I said, because of the shortage of pathologists. So those cases can be brought forward for quicker attention. So those are sort of screening. And then you've got the scenario that I mentioned where a pathologist is looking at prostate biopsy and then is umming and ahhing between a Gleason grade 3 and a Gleason grade 4. So that's a sort of diagnostic tool that they use at the time of interpretation. And then finally, there are tools that will interpret the images that it sees, it will interpret the biomarkers, and be able to quantify. So that's one of the other areas that's very time consuming for a pathologist is quantification and also counting. So AI is also being geared towards quantification of certain stains that will help in the therapeutic regime that is administered, and counting mitotic figures and anything else that needs to be counted as the sort of process that we go through in generating a pathology report. And then finally, sorry, go on.
No, go on, please.
No, and then finally, the Holy Grail, as I said, is where everything is assimilated by the AI, the morphology, the immunohistochemistry, the biomarkers, the molecular status, and it interprets it all based on the images and gives you a complete readout of information of the profile of that particular cancer, for instance, which including what drugs it will respond to and the prognosis. And that is the Holy Grail that will really inform an oncologist's treatment.
Yes, that's fascinating. So now, if the AI system is also using images, it could be using features of those images, which is totally different from what you are. I mean, in likelihood, I guess it's going to be using some of the same, like the obvious kind of thing would be the size of the cell, right? But it could be using aspects of the image which have got nothing to do with what you're doing as a human specialist.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's the beauty of it, Felix. Yes, it sees things that we won't be able to see morphologically, correct? And that's where the charm is in using and utilizing AI as we go ahead.
Now, what those kind of features are may be totally invisible for you and permanently invisible, right? So in other words, the AI system sometimes they keep their secrets. Does that bother you at all?
Well, it's trained, and I guess obviously the fact that it's trained and controlled, people know what features are being taken into account, because at the end of the day, the cornerstone is morphology, and then you build on it. So it's a foundational building block, and the fact that the algorithm will learn that a tumor that looks like this, that has the following shape, sizes, architecture, pattern in the colon, will express particular biomarkers, and based on that, it just adds on to those building blocks. So sure. Yes, the beauty of it is, yes, it's just going to revolutionize the way we deliver pathology.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How do you see this area evolving in the next 10, 20, maybe even 30 years? How do you see the future?
Oh, absolutely. I think the role of digital pathology has hit home during COVID times, where people wanted to work from home, and the inability to do that really struck a very important note that we needed to relook at the way we delivered pathology services, given also the shortages. So I think more and more hospitals, especially in the UK, have embraced a digital pathology workflow and a digital pathology solution, which allows the pathologists that flexibility. It allows them to freelance pathologists to provide that expertise. So I think one of the major impediments at the moment is that hospital information technology systems aren't equipped to handle these images, which are generally quite large. And so that needs to be upgraded. So that's one of the rate limiting steps at the moment. But it will certainly become standard fare for a pathologist, instead of using a microscope, to view the images using a monitor. And training in the subspecialties of pathology have gone along that route, where exams are now done with images on a monitor or a computer rather than glass slides. So I think the younger trainees are now used to looking at images that they can manipulate on a screen rather than using a microscope. So I think that transformation will start in terms of the basic way in which we do pathology. And then as AI matures and is validated, those will be bolted on and added to the workflow that as a pathologist.
Okay. Now, let's talk about regulation briefly, which can sound a bit boring to outsiders, but it's incredibly important because without that, nothing ever gets done, right? So where are you with getting your systems approved?
So absolutely. So the use of digital pathology and then AI is obviously transformational and different to the usual standard fare of pathology delivery. And as such, the various organizations that govern the practice of pathology in different locales have started to take into account this new mode of doing pathology. And as such, patient health information and confidentiality is of primary importance. And so, for instance, at Diagnostics, we guarantee banking level security of patient information. So, cybersecurity is also a very important issue these days in all walks of life. And obviously, this is something that is a major consideration. But again, we have ensured that the security is, as I said, at banking level. And the regulations are being written such that any IT requirements have to be met dependent on the area in which the practice is. So there are various organizations that are cooperating in developing regulatory guidelines for the practice of digital pathology across the world. Yeah.
So have you any of your AI-based diagnostic systems approved yet? And if not, when do you expect to see that?
So Diagnostics, no. So we've got AI for internal use, so that our pathologist network can use them. And so they don't have to go through the stringent regulatory process if it was commercially marketed. We will, as our AI matures and we validate more, yes, obviously in the next 2 or 3 years, we'd be looking to bring some of them on board commercially and go through the regulatory process that is required for commercialization of AI. But at the moment, we can use it internally with the caveat to say that this is a sort of almost research-only tool, and it assists the pathologists in counting. And so we've got very defined applications at the moment.
Okay, good. So let's talk briefly about medical AI in general. What's your apart from your own AI systems? What's your favorite example of medical AI?
I think it's really transformed the way medicine in general is delivered. And I think one of the initial ones was diabetic retinopathy, which was one of the very early applications of AI, where you can use a smartphone application in a diabetic patient, look at the eye, an image is generated, the algorithm will then compare it with the previous images to say whether the retinopathy in that diabetic is worsening or static or improving. And those images can then be sent remotely to the treating physician, who can review it electronically and then feedback to the patient. So it really has brought healthcare and treatment and to the home. And that's really very important in terms of patients who are sick and have difficulty moving around. They can get the expertise at their home. Yeah.
So in that case, do you need some kind of lens to be added onto your smartphone camera?
No, most the app takes care of that. So most standard smartphones have the ability to accommodate that. Yeah, and there are various other applications like blood pressure monitoring and very simple things that require routine checkups can be done remotely. So that really has impacted the life of patients. So instead of going in every month or 2 months and trekking down to the hospital, looking for parking, waiting, etc., and the anxiety of all that, they do it in the comfort of their home. So already that has transformed healthcare.
Now, who would have thought, by the way, smartphone apps could be so useful for healthcare? No, I don't think anyone foresaw that, did they?
I wish I had, yeah. but certainly, yes, absolutely. And I think that's the way it's going to go as well. I think having apps for various facets of healthcare and a very good example also is, for instance, the waiting times for patients who go to have blood samples taken. And this is usually a common endpoint at the end of the day, where patients attend clinics and then they're asked to do some blood work. And everyone sort of gravitates to where the samples are taken. And then en masse, patients descend on it and have to wait long periods. So the availability of an app and AI to then tell them, look, come down at 4:35 and you'll be seen within 2 minutes, allows them the flexibility of going and having a coffee or relaxing and then sort of sitting in a waiting room. So, the applications are manifold.
Okay. And could you say something about your perspective on the risks of medical eye in general? You can take that question any way you like. It could be practical, it could be ethical. What are the main?
Well, I think from an ethical point of view, I think it's very important. And again, this is my own bias, is that the doctors are still pivotal in any decision making. And we use these tools that are at our disposal, wisely and not reliant on it totally. At the end of the day, we cannot absolve ourselves as physicians, as healthcare workers, of the responsibility and accountability for our patients' well-being. And I do not want to foresee a scenario where I'm not responsible. The algorithm said you had X or Y disease, and therefore it's not my fault. And that really is the risk I foresee as one of the potential pitfalls. And I think it's incumbent on us as physicians not to go down that road. So from an ethical point of view, I think we still have to retain the high ground in that respect.
So let me press you on that, because is that an issue about patient care, or is it an issue about legal liability, or is it somehow both? Because it sounds, from what you've said, it sounds like legal liability to me.
Absolutely. And I think that's, we live in an increasingly litigious world, sadly, especially in medicine. And, people are risk averse and want to shy away from the absolute responsibility. And one of them is to say, well, it's not, anything to do with me, it was the algorithm. And therefore, I think it's also important that institutions don't allow that kind of scenario to develop. And ultimately, the physician has to take responsibility. But yes, there is the possibility of a more defensive approach and a hands-off approach to patient care. And I would not be, happy to see that happen.
But ethically, it's a very paradoxical situation, right? Because we could find ourselves in a situation where there is a trade-off between quality of care and these issues about legal liability. We could have a situation where AI systems are more accurate diagnosticians than human clinicians, but nonetheless, software developers don't want to be legally liable, and therefore we end up with a somehow.
No, absolutely. Whilst 98% of the cases will behave in a particular fashion as predicted by the algorithm or AI, there's always going to be that certain exception, right? And whether it's at 1% or 2% or less than 1%, there's always going to be that exception. And that's why I think we have to utilize both the skill of the physician together with the AI. And at the end of the day, as I said, I think the physician has to take responsibility.
Right. Okay. Runjan, it has been a fascinating chat. And thank you so much for joining us for the last half an hour. It's been really, really very informative and enjoyable. And absolute best of luck with Diagnexia. Sounds like a fantastic company. So good luck.
Yes, I think, being innovative and game-changing is quite a important phase in which pathology and medicine is moving into. So I think one has to embrace it and use it wisely, as I said. So thank you again very much for giving me the opportunity to chat.
Okay, not at all. It's been a pleasure. Thanks again. Talk to you again, Runjan.
Cheerio.
Thank you for listening. I'm Felix Beacher. Ping me on LinkedIn for more information on Omdia's services in healthcare technology. See you next time.